Hi, welcome to today's episode. If you're listening to this, chances are you've experienced or are currently living through the challenges of working in a high pressure or even a toxic work environment. It's a space where deadlines are tight, the expectations are high, and the atmosphere can feel suffocating. You might find yourself navigating office politics, microaggressions, or just plain stress, and it can feel overwhelming. Today, we're going to talk about something that might seem counterintuitive at first: how to live with compassion and forgiveness in such a challenging environment. You might be thinking, why should I be compassionate? Why should I forgive, especially when the situation seems so unfair? But stick with me because I believe this approach can help shift your mindset and ultimately help you navigate those difficult circumstances more effectively. So let's dive in. The first one is the power of compassion in the workplace. In a high pressure environment, it's easy to fall into a survival mindset. Everyone is trying to meet targets, maintain their positions, and push through the stress. In these environments, it's common for empathy and compassion to take a back seat. But what happens when we allow compassion to be part of our work life, even in a toxic environment? Compassion isn't just about being kind to others. It's also about understanding and accepting the reality of the situation. Sometimes, when we are surrounded by stress, we start to internalize the negativity, and that builds resentment. We feel disconnected from others and even from ourselves. But by choosing compassion, we can begin to humanize our colleagues, our bosses, and even ourselves. Everyone around you, no matter how difficult or harsh they might seem, is likely dealing with their own stress, insecurities, and challenges. When we start to see people through that lens, we stop reacting purely out of anger or frustration and begin to cultivate understanding. This doesn't mean excusing bad behavior, no. It means creating emotional space between yourself and the toxic environment. When you adopt a compassionate mindset, you are essentially protecting your emotional well being. You're reminding yourself that not everything is personal, and you are giving yourself the freedom to respond calmly instead of reacting out of hurt. Second one is self compassion. So, how we get the first step? Let's talk about something even more important: the self compassion, okay? If you are working in a high pressure environment, there's a good chance you're being hard on yourself too. Maybe you feel like you're not performing well enough. Maybe you blame yourself for not being able to cope with the stress, or you have convinced yourself that you should just tough it up. But let me tell you, self compassion is not weakness, it's essential for survival in these environments. Self compassion is about recognizing that you are a human too, you have limits. So you cannot be perfect, and that is okay. It's about giving yourself permission to take a breath, take a break, and acknowledge that you're doing your best given the circumstances. When you start practicing self compassion, you stop the cycle of self criticism and guilt that often builds up in toxic environments. You begin to set healthier boundaries for yourself, both emotionally and also physically. You learn to give yourself grace when things don't go as planned, and you start to focus on progress instead of perfection. So, how we are understanding the role of forgiveness? Ah, that's the 11 in the room. Forgiveness. Forgiving someone in a toxic work environment might seem impossible. Why should you forgive someone who's been rude to you? Doesn't make sense, right? Why forgive a manager who never gives you a credit or a coworker who constantly undermines you? It's, you know, impossible. But here's the thing. Forgiveness is not about letting someone off the hook or condoning harmful behavior. No. Forgiveness is about you. It's about freeing yourself from the emotional baggage that weigh you down when you hold on to grudges or resentment. So, when we choose not to forgive, we carry the burden of bitterness with us. And that burden only adds to the toxicity where we are already experiencing. When you forgive, you're not saying that what the other person did was right. No. You are simply choosing to release the grip that resentment has on you. You are taking back control of your emotional energy. Think of it as an act of self liberation. You are choosing peace over anger, healing over hurt. You are choosing yourself. But I want to emphasize that forgiveness doesn't mean you have to continue to tolerate bad behavior. No. You can forgive someone and still set firm boundaries. Forgiveness is an internal process. So while boundaries are external, that action that help protect your well-being. So the next one is how to practice compassion and forgiveness in real time. You might be thinking, okay, this sounds good in theory, but how do I actually put it into practice in my daily work life? Okay, let's break it down into practical steps. The first one, start with awareness. Notice when you feel triggered by something at work, maybe a comment, a meeting, or even just an overwhelming workload. Instead of immediately reacting, you need to pause, okay? Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? What is the real source of this emotion? Okay. And then second, practice empathy. Imagine that the person who upset you is also struggling with their own pressures. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but it helps you approach the situation with a more balanced perspective. Next one is choose a compassionate response, even if it's just internally. Okay, maybe it's offering a kind word to a colleague, or maybe it's giving yourself the permission to take a step back and breathe. Small acts of compassion repeated over time can change the way you experience your work environment. And finally, when it comes to forgiveness, start small. You don't have to forgive everyone overnight. Okay? Start with something manageable. Maybe a small slight or a frustration. Practice letting it go and notice how it feels to release that weight from your shoulders. Next one, compassion and forgiveness as tools for resilience. So ultimately, compassion and forgiveness are not just nice ideas. They are tools for building resilience, your resilience in a toxic work environment. So they help you to maintain your sense of self, protect your mental health, and keep your emotional energy intact. Living with compassion means you are effectively choosing to rise above the negativity around you. You are choosing to be in control of your emotional responses instead of being at the mercy of the chaos. And forgiveness? Well, it's your way of taking back your power. Remember, you are more than your work environment. You are more than the stress, more than the toxic atmosphere. So, by choosing compassion and forgiveness, you are not just surviving, you are thriving in the face of adversity. Okay? We come to our conclusion. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave you with this thought. Okay? Compassion and forgiveness are acts of strength, not weakness. In a high pressure, toxic work environment, it's easy to get caught up in the negativity and the grind. But when you choose to live with compassion for others and for yourself, of course, you are taking steps toward a healthier, more balanced life. And when you forgive, you are freeing yourself from the burdens of resentment and anger that only hold you back. Thank you for listening today. If this episode resonates with you, share it with someone who might need to hear these words. And remember, in the toughest of environments, you still have the power to choose compassion and forgiveness. See you later. Bye bye.